George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, Oscar Grant, Eric Gardner, Philando Castile, Samuel DuBose, Sandra Bland, Walter Scott, Terrence Crutcher. These are just a small number of names of black people who have been murdered by cops for just existing on camera.
The fact that that's only a small list is disturbing at best.
It's the ones that because it was caught on film, we're able to actually know at least a little bit of what happened.
And obviously, what's been triggered as far as the protests and whatnot it's been a long time coming, and sort of the last straw on the camel's back. I mean, that's really the way I look at it. It's not specifically about one event. It's just one event that sort of triggered what we're seeing today. And this is not a first time for something along these lines to happen. But in any case, I think taking a moment to discuss some of the issues, even though we're just a humble little 90s comedy podcast, is important, as everyone should be taking some time out to discuss the issues. So with that said, you're listening to Namely 90s, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
I'm Brandon.
And of course, I'm Andrew. You're now on our fourth episode, so kind of a heavy topic to jump into with very little comedy under our belts, but here we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're new. We're just starting out. We don't have much of an audience right now, but this is what we try to do with Namely 90s is try to relate the 90s with what was going on now. I mean, of course, it's a nostalgia thing, but it's also at times we want to link to what's going on in current events and current events. Although you're listening to this almost a week after we record it, so we don't know what's going to happen. We're actually recording this on Blackout Tuesday because we wanted to take time to just talk about what's happening in the world. And this is coming out 2 weeks after the incident occurred.
Maybe we shouldn't use the word incident at this point, given the independent medical examiner's findings of the fact that in fact his death was in fact a homicide. Sorry, I was tripping over my words trying to look something up. But I mean, that's what came out yesterday. And I think you would think that was obvious based on the video, but having that independent confirmation obviously I think helps. I didn't hear about the independent confirmation. I just remember the bullshit. Excuse me, the BS. That's fine. We can explicit this one. I think it warrants it.
Yeah, the bullshit autopsy given less than a week ago, that it was due to possible complications from what was in his body.
And I mean, I want to get into these sort of step by step, but does it really matter ultimately what the words were used on the piece of paper to describe what led to his death? I mean, ultimately, you have to connect the two. And even if you don't, the treatment is still reprehensible at best, ultimately. So,
and just before we dive too deep, I just wanted to say what makes more sense than two white kids? I mean, I'm half white from the suburbs of a liberal state talking about a race they're not a part of. Obviously, we can't know how it feels to be black in America because of our privilege, but we also can't let the conversation die anymore because that's what has led to people actually dying.
Well, and we have to move beyond conversation. I mean, one of the things that the important thing about all this is that we don't make this about us, but at the same time, us being, myself, non-person of color, white, is how do we actually act rather than just talk about it, and not to serve ourselves, but to serve others. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit. Is there are some posts on Facebook and social media has gone crazy. And so an individual said they were tired of hearing, white people's apologies, and I get that. So my question was, I want to know specifically, what can I do? And so I found some resources, and I'd like to kind of cover some of that. There's a good article on Medium that's 75 points where we can help. And I don't want to cover every single one, but I think it's important we talk about those and not lose momentum here, because this is could be a turning point, and we need to utilize this this outrage to make things better. Okay. So I guess I'll just run through a few, and I think this will. Well, hold on. I guess one thing I want to say first is there are a lot of misconceptions out there, and a lot of common arguments that you hear that sort of in a veiled way are not necessarily racism, but certainly are ignorance. And I will say, in the past, I may have participated in those things, but now it's time to really be self-reflective and see how I've contributed to that. So one of the things I want to talk about is this whole, the phraseology, the Black Lives Matter slogan. And what you get a lot of is, well, so do all lives, so do blue lives matter, and all these lives matter. And what people don't understand is the spirit of the movement isn't to say only Black Lives Matter, but it's about raising awareness and saying, we need to do something about this. It has nothing to do with saying other people's lives don't matter. I think people have a hard time understanding that, but that's not what it's about. It's truly about advocating for a group of people who we need to be doing better by. That's ultimately what it comes down to.
I think the best thing I've seen on it, and it's sad to say, this round of protests, but it is because it keeps happening, because nothing does inevitably change. But the best retort I've seen is no lives matter until Black Lives Matter.
I think it's good. It's a good way to put it. I never actually heard that.
Like if you don't support Black Lives Mattering, then how can you say all lives matter?
Right. And the other aspect I want to cover too is you get a lot of this, support for law enforcement, and, not all cops are bad. And I think that fundamentally that's probably true. But again, that doesn't really matter. By being complicit in what's going on, we and they are just as guilty as everyone else. So, although, yes, there are good people, there's probably a majority of good people, the way that they're systemically allowing this behavior to continue within their ranks is just not okay. And that's what we have to seek to improve.
Indeed. It's goes back to the we're all Nazis bad argument, where they were complicit in what they did. Are they just following orders? In this case, it's not following orders so much as just not stopping the corruption from inside.
Right. And lastly, America has got it wrong many times. I think in spirit, and in the letter of the Constitution, it would seem to provide equality to all. But in reality, that's not what we're seeing. And when we've seen in the past where we've gotten it wrong and found out how to get it right or more right, and we're still not there yet. But I think the patriotism that we're seeing, or the so-called patriotism that is basically thinly veiled racism, is just, it's wrong. And to me, not even thinly, but to me, it's like, the thing about America is that it is supposed to be equal, and it's not. And we all, as a country, need to do something to make it that way. And that's patriotism to me, not this, I'm going to stand in front of the city hall with a gun because of some vague, not really true Antifa threat so that I can show off my $10,000 worth of assault rifles and other crap that I decided to spend my money on for no apparent reason.
Yeah. I mean, even I'd even like to bring up the fact that there was an article released last night that so like what you were thinly referencing was that there was an Antifa threat against a town close to one of our hometowns, and it's been revealed that there are white nationalist groups posing just do false flag operations to get
that's
people.
True. Yeah, that's what I've heard.
I think it was. I want to say New York Post article. I saw it last night before or after I prepped everything, so I don't have the actual link right now. But it was some weird white nationalist group name that had poor spelling.
You're kidding.
Yeah, shocked. Although it might have just been to improve their SEO.
The resurgence of white nationalism is absolutely it's inexplicable. It's not inexplicable. I should say. It's very inexplicable.
Yeah.
Let me reword that. It's very explicable, but in this day and age, it just seems so backwards that that's the way that we're going.
But again, that's because we lived in the leftmost state when we were growing up, and we thought that there was equality going on around us, even though we were just a stone throw away from a cell of people that were not so much into equality and more into wearing jumpsuits that look like the Confederate flag.
Yeah, and this. Yes, I think protests ultimately in this way are going to be the start of change anyway. I don't think it's going to be the end all and be all. But just like we're maybe sitting here saying, well, not all people are bad. Not all people in X group are bad. I think the same is true of the protesters. I think largely you're seeing very peaceful protests with small pockets of maybe looting or whatever, and then some police escalation, obviously, in those areas. But overall, I think the general message of the protesters is one of peace. And you hear all these people, well, basically white people quoting Martin Luther King, who was in fact a pacifist. But that's what most people are doing right now. It's only a small group that the news is covering. By the way, the news, we always talk about the news. They're just trying to get clicks. They're trying to get advertising revenue. Why wouldn't they report on rioting and looting?
Okay. So, so yesterday there was a protest in San Luis Obispo, where I live. And one, I didn't hear about it until maybe an hour into the protest. It was not covered. It was by the media here until much later. It went on for 6 hours. It blocked multiple parts of the street. They went onto the highway at one point. Regardless where they were, it didn't get reported on until 6 p.m. 6 hours after it started, around 7 p.m. when they finally were told to disperse. They didn't. And then the police started to use tear gas and rubber bullets on them after kneeling with them, not an hour before.
Right. And one of the disturbing things I saw when I was watching some news coverage from, I think, Seattle, was literally someone being taken down by the police. And I kid you not, one of the officers put his knee on the back of the guy's neck. And it's like, literally, why would you ever think that was a good idea, specifically after that event, the video and everything? Why would you do that?
Mm-hmm. Another Seattle event. I think this was on Saturday. The police officer that maced the little girl. Oh yeah,
classy, good move.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What a city! What a city we come from.
It's just it's completely ridiculous. And again, that's not everyone, but we can't have other officers standing right next to them watching that happen and not saying anything. And that's what it has to be. This is not going to be something that the federal government is going to fix. And to that end, I think there's a couple things I want to do. I want to start talking through this Medium article. And then I do also want to...
Were you not already doing that?
No, actually, I haven't even started on that yet. I just wanted to talk about a few of the things at the outset. But I don't know if you read Obama's post from
Sunday,
yesterday morning, which I shared today. And I think
I was doing my own Twitter ranting this morning.
Oh, that's okay. Just the level of eloquence and how it was written is a welcome change. I'll leave it at that without making this terribly political, which I probably will later.
Change we can believe in.
It's a long article, but I kind of want to read it. Or a long post, and I'll try not. I'm not the best at reading aloud.
Please do your Obama voice during our sensitive.
Yeah, I can't do that. Mm-hmm. So I'll just go through it, and then we can talk about it at the end. Okay. So from Barack Obama yesterday, 7:16 a.m. Pacific, presumably on my Facebook, as millions of people across the country take to the streets and raise their voices in response to the killing of George Floyd and the ongoing problem of unequal justice, many people have reached out asking how we can sustain momentum to bring about real change. Ultimately, it's going to be up to a new generation of activists to shape strategies that best fit the times. But I believe there are some basic lessons to draw from past efforts that are worth remembering. First, the waves of protests across the country represent a genuine and legitimate frustration over a decades-long failure to reform police practices and the broader criminal justice system in the United States. The overwhelming majority of participants have been peaceful, courageous, responsible, and inspiring. They deserve our respect and support, not condemnation. Something that police in cities like Camden and Flint have condemnably understood. That's a good word. On the other hand, a small minority of folks who have resorted to violence in various forms, whether out of genuine anger or mere opportunism, are putting innocent people at risk, compounding the destruction of neighborhoods that are often already short on services and investment and detracting from the larger cause. I saw an elderly Black woman being interviewed today in tears because the only grocery store in her neighborhood had been trashed. If history is any guide, that store may take years to come back. So let's not excuse violence or rationalize it or participate in it. If we want our criminal justice system and American society at large to operate on a higher ethical code, then we have to model that code ourselves. Second, I've heard some suggest that the recurrent problem of racial bias in our criminal justice system proves that only protests and direct action can bring about change, and that voting and participation in electoral politics is a waste of time. I couldn't disagree more. The point of protest is to raise public awareness, to put a spotlight on injustice, and to make the powers that be uncomfortable. In fact, throughout American history, it's often only been in response to protests and civil disobedience that the political system has even paid attention to marginalized communities. But eventually, aspirations have to be translated into specific laws and institutional practices, and in a democracy, that only happens when we elect government officials who are responsive to our demands. Getting there. No, moreover, it's important for us to understand which levels of government have the biggest impact on our criminal justice system and police practices. And I'm going to emphasize this. That's me talking. When we think about politics, a lot of us focus only on the presidency and the federal government. And yes, we should be fighting to make sure that we have a president, a Congress, a U.S. Justice Department, and a federal judiciary that actually recognizes the ongoing corrosive role that racism plays in our society and want to do something about it. But the elected officials who matter most in reforming police departments and the criminal justice system work at the state and local levels. It's mayors and county executives that appoint most police chiefs and negotiate collective bargaining agreements with police unions. It's district attorneys and state's attorneys that decide whether or not to investigate and ultimately charge those involved in police misconduct. Those are all elected positions. In some places, police review boards with the power to monitor police conduct are elected as well. Unfortunately, voter turnout in these local races is usually pitifully low, especially among young people, which makes no sense given the direct impact these offices have on social justice issues. Not to mention the fact that who wins and who loses those seats is often determined by just a few thousand or even a few hundred votes. So the bottom line is this. If we want to bring about real change, one moment. I had a computer
then the choice isn't between protest and politics. We have to do both. We have to mobilize to raise awareness, and we have to organize and cast our ballots to make sure that we elect candidates who will act on reform.
Thank you.
Finally. Yep.
Yeah, you can keep going. Go for it.
The more specific we can make demands for criminal justice and police reform, the harder it will be for elected officials to just offer lip service to the cause and then fall back into business as usual once protests have gone away. The content of that reform agenda will be different for various communities. A big city may need one set of reforms. A rural community may need another. Some agencies will require wholesale rehabilitation. Others should make minor improvements. Every law enforcement agency should have clear policies, including an independent body that conducts investigations of alleged misconduct. Tailoring reforms for each community will require local activists and organizations to do their research and educate fellow citizens in their community on what strategies work best. But as a starting point, here's a report and toolkit developed by the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, and based on the work of the Task Force on 21st Century Policing that I formed when I was in the White House. That was Obama, not me. And if you're interested in taking concrete action, we've also created a dedicated site at the Obama Foundation to aggregate and direct you to useful resources and organizations who've been fighting the good fight at local and national levels for years. I recognize that these past few months have been hard and dispiriting, that the fear, sorrow, uncertainty, and hardship of a pandemic have been compounded by a tragic reminder that prejudice and inequality still shape so much of American life. But watching the heightened activism of young people in recent weeks, of every race and every station, makes me hopeful. If going forward we can channel our justifiable anger into peace, sustained and effective action, peaceful, sustained, and effective action, then this moment can be a real turning point in our nation's long journey to live up to our highest ideals. Let's get to work. Barack Obama.
And as far as the links
husband,
go,
president, citizen.
As far as the links go on that, we'll get those posted in the show notes and the website, both at obama.org. So head on over there. Yeah, that's amazing. And I think it's funny that, sorry.
Did you realize that was going to be like 8 minutes worth of reading?
I did not, but we don't necessarily have to stick with our limit on this one. I like that the second comment down is, at least on mine, is from Deborah Burns. We need to start at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. If he ever gets out of the basement, on second thought, let's let him stay there till election. Then and only then can we and the world breathe. Literally didn't read the article. Didn't read the post. You're an idiot, Deborah. Sorry, I just had to say that. I mean, literally, don't worry about the president. Like that was categorically what he said. Worry about state and local elections. And Deborah swoops in to talk about the president. I don't like the president. That's not really the issue here, and that's literally what the post just said. I'm sorry, I'm done.
That's really weird that Deborah is your number two, because I do not see her in my comments.
She has 269 responses. And then the next one down, we miss having a president capable of empathy and intelligence. Not untrue. That one has 2.9 thousand responses. So, it's I agree with that. I think this level of again, eloquence and poise has been missing from the White House for some time, but it is what it is right now. So I think we should look more at what he said specifically about state and local elections, because they're boring, right? And I think a lot of people don't really understand their impact. Maybe a lot of people don't realize the things that he said there, which is they appoint a lot of local officials. And so,
okay. Yeah. I found one on your chain. This is from John. Sorry, Mr. President, you were in the White House for 8 years and did damn all to change the structural inequalities of the system. Sitting in your comfortable office or home pontificating merely shows that you weren't really serious about being president. Nothing changed. Maybe it will now. The fire emphasized this time.
Once again, read our Constitution. That's not how it works.
Or, just maybe read the article.
Yeah. And so to that point, I will admit I've been woefully terrible at voting in local elections. So that's something, personally that I am going to do to try and make changes. And I realize just me doing it is only one very, very small piece of the puzzle, but I think that's
one critical. More person. Yeah. I participate in my elections, so I'm just going to high road you on that one.
Well, we move every 18 months, so by the time an election comes around, we pretty much move. Right now, we're living in the white supremacy crucible of North Idaho, which is only for mercifully 27 more days.
Start the resistance, man.
No kidding. North Idaho has been pretty quiet, not surprisingly. But in any case, I want to go into the article, the 75 things white people can do for racial justice. And this is on medium.com. Again, we'll put this in the show notes and the website. And so I'm just going to go through a few. This one is interesting. So Google whether, number one, Google whether your local police department currently outfits all on-duty police officers with a body-worn camera. And it requires that it be turned on immediately when responding to a call. Literally, why, in this age of cameras, literally, why can they not all have them?
Or moreover, why aren't they always on?
Right. I mean, the amount of capacity and bandwidth and storage is immense right now. I mean, you can store just gobs and gobs, terabytes of data on something the size of a stick of gum.
Yeah.
So
on everything except for a PlayStation or an Xbox,
and you can upload it in real time to Amazon Web Services and have it served on the cloud forever. Mm-hmm. We're in an immensely technologically advanced time, and again, if you're policing in a way that's appropriate, it protects you. And if you're policing in a way that's inappropriate, it protects others. So why would we not do this? That's my question.
Again, you ask questions that I can't answer.
Well, so, I mean, that's number one. And so writing to your city or town government and police chief to advocate for it. And I think that's a really critical piece, because this, again, there is good policing that happens. It's rarely caught on camera. The bad stuff is caught on camera, but we should be doing this as a society. It just makes good sense. Let's see here. So, sorry, I'm reading as I talk. They're long. They're not short points. Mm-hmm. So this is an interesting one. Many companies have recruiting channels that are predominantly white. Work with your HR department to recruit Americans who are descendants of enslaved Africans. So I think that's a really good one too. Really, and just basically hiring a person who should have the job. And I will tell you that is not something that race can help you decide ultimately. So we really got to get away from that. I can't
tell if you're for or against that point.
Which point?
The one that you just read.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think too many people make hiring decisions, even though it's not necessarily institutional. They make hiring decisions based on factors other than just job performance. Can this person do the job? Mm-hmm. And that has to be what we look at, because there are many, I think I'm allowed to say this. I'm not sure. I'm trying to be careful. Many people of color who far exceed their cohort's level of performance or background and don't get the job, and you have to wonder what that means. So
racism.
Well, yeah,
systemic, obviously, but is it really systemic if not just local to the person that's hiring and the business?
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. So people who are in hiring positions.
Not to say it's not systemic. I'm just saying they're also just racist.
Correct. Trying to think of, there's some good ones here for sure.
I'm glad you wrote them down beforehand.
Don't buy from companies that use prison labor. Find a good list here. Again, this is number 11, so we'll make sure you get this posted.
Okay, but that prison labor. We had to. I mean, obviously, as consumers, we need to recognize where our products are coming from.
Yes.
But damn, I mean,
This is an interesting one. Call or write to state legislators, federal legislators, and your governor to decriminalize weed, aka marijuana. No, quote, no, not because black folks use weed more frequently than white folks, but because black Americans are arrested for marijuana possession far more frequently than whites. So, also a good one. I mean, Washington has already done that.
So is California.
It gives me some pause, because I think there's some interesting stuff about that, in that when many things were considered non-essential during COVID, our pot shops were, of course, considered essential.
I mean, under technically it's an agriculture business, so I understand how they slipped by.
And the liquor stores too. And both of these directly put money into the coffers of the government, which I'm sure weren't used to do anything useful. I mean, we see the government waste that's out there.
But on the other hand, decriminalizing marijuana has also led to the gentrification of marijuana supply.
That's very true. You have craft cannabis and all these places that are like basically fixed up sheds with the shiplap on the walls. You know, it's all a little bit too like high end white folk stuff.
Yeah,
now, so.
the next generation, it's just going to be. I mean, they have basically Apple stores of weed now in bigger cities, and it doesn't. I understand that decriminalizing allows for less, prosecuting for holding a dime bag, but at the same time, it's also stifling and suppressing African Americans who were doing well with marijuana sales and farming. I mean, I watched. I think it was last week's Patriot Act with Hassan Minhaj, where they went into much better detail on this. And had I known we were going to go this direction, I would have prepared something more than just me stammering. And
well, stammering can be useful. Here's a couple of good ones right in a row here. 39. Listen without ego and defensiveness to people of color. Truly listen. Don't scroll past articles written by people of color. Read them. Important.
I mean, the biggest question on my mind is who wrote this article?
I don't know. Let's find out. I haven't looked yet. Number 40. Don't be silent about that racist joke. Silence is support. And I think those can be pretty insidious, and they can, on the surface, seem pretty innocent, but it's just that level of sort of ingrained ignorance that we wouldn't consider how that might be considered offensive. And again, this is a time where just letting it go is not really an option. It makes you as complicit as the person making the comment. So
that's true. I mean, people. It's a question of how humor has evolved over the years to actually. Along with what is acceptable in our society. If you look back 20 years to a TV show like Friends, you can see how tone deaf some of their jokes are at this point in time.
Yeah, and interestingly, I mean, you've got a lot of people clinging to these sort of archaic ways of thinking, and it was interesting. I was listening to a podcast, and the individual is saying that, one of the things is that, blacks or people of color don't have very good access to, they aren't able to get ID. And his contention was, they can just go down to the DMV and do that. There's actually proven places where they literally, it's a 50-mile trip for these disadvantaged communities to get to a DMV to get a license. That's literally like you're excluding them from that because they don't have the resources to get there.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, that's the whole push behind people trying to suppress the mail-in vote right now, is that it will help minorities and lower class citizens that aren't able to make it to the ballot to vote.
And you need ID to do that. And there was another thing that said they don't have access to checking accounts. And his contention again was that checking accounts are free. Anyone can get them. Well, what do you need to get them? ID.
Yeah.
So
and I'm sure, well, I'm not sure, but it's possible that a person that's making that argument grew up in a place like we did, where it is easier to have access to those things. But this is widespread in places like the South and probably even Eastern Washington. I can't speak on that. You're over there.
It's different here, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah.
I'm reading through this. Check out Black Movies, TV, and Other Media. Blah blah blah.
I watched Black Lightning.
There's just a long list. That's why the blah blah blah. I'm not going to go with every list. There's Blackish, which I've never really watched, and then there's Mixedish, which almost seems like
it's a spin-off of Blackish.
Yeah, does mixed have a negative connotation? I feel like it could. I don't know. I feel like I've heard it used in such a way.
I mean, as someone of mixed descent,
gotcha.
Not the same mixed, but
still.
I mean, I say things more like half-breed is more offensive, but again,
fairly offensive. Yeah.
Yeah, but then again, I'm speaking from a half white, half Asian descent, and not from a half black descent.
And obviously I have no perspective, so moving on. Let's see. Personally divest your investments in private prisons and detention centers. I don't have investments, so that's easy enough.
So I think what is most important right now, and what you're trying to say is try to support local black businesses.
Yes, absolutely.
There are people right now shouting out who in your community can use the help. Look for ways to donate. Like right now, the protesters are being arrested. You could help donate to bail funds for local protesters that have been jailed. And personally, if you have the means to donate, I would say find a way that it means something to you as well as to other people. I mean, there's national organizations like the NAACP, Black Lives Matter, Southern Poverty Law Center, Campaign Zero, Alliance for Justice, National Urban League, and the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. But there's also stuff at state levels. In California, there's like Anti-Police Terror Fund, or like by county, Orange County Bail Fund, San Diego Community Fund, stuff like that. But in general, I think the thing that I've seen a lot is just listen to your black friends, and only if they're willing to share their experiences. Don't be like, hey man, you should just tell me what it's like to be black. Well,
and listen, I think that's really important because education and awareness are a huge part of this. But I don't think you can rely solely on that. I think you have to make real concerted efforts to make change. And part of that, I think where it starts is better understanding the struggle. If you've never experienced it, and then using that to take action. And communicating with people of color in your sphere or community and saying, okay, these are the things we're going to start doing and working together as a group. So I'm actually, I've never been into anything from an activist standpoint, really. Mm-hmm. And I've made some of those easy comments about, and we didn't even talk about this, but those easy comments about, Colin Kaepernick or whoever it might be. It's sort of startling, the symbolism in his protest, which initially I was against, again, from that side, the sort of lens of patriotism, which I now realize is a complete farce in that regard.
Oh yeah.
But literally on his knee. And that's the exact pose that the police officer is in.
And another thing people have been pointing out, sorry to cut you short on that.
No, you're fine.
They complained, our current administration complained when he did that to protest, to civilly protest. But also now that protests will be, the national protests are places where looters and bad seeds are able to go in and spark violence or property damage. They're saying that's the wrong way to protest. Even though,
and not 3 weeks ago, not 3 weeks ago, a bunch of people with guns marched on the Capitol because they didn't want to be told they couldn't go to a restaurant or have their hair cut or wear a mask. Yeah. And that was fine. They brought weapons. Imagine if that was hundreds of, and just from a policing perspective, hundreds of people of color up there, and they had guns. You think that's going to go down? No. The answer is no. So that's just,
And that illustrates the point of this systemic racism in this country. Because if you honestly can't see it, just keep listening. Don't block it out.
And it's okay if you were wrong and you were complicit. It's okay to say it at this point.
It is,
and move past it. Don't just because you spent a long time making a mistake doesn't mean you should stick to it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to change.
Don't double down on it. That's
exactly.
human instinct to double down on what you think is right. But
I'm probably the worst offender I know, frankly. If you know me well,
you are. And no, I'm kidding. I also, we are very similar in that respect. But I am proud to see you say something like that. And because I've known you since we were 2 or 3. I've known your view on politics and such since we were small children and ill-informed.
Well, the sad thing is you can't believe in things like the free market and capitalism,
mm-hmm.
and then also believe in equality and justice, because the way our political system is now set up is, at least if you're on the right, you favor certain things and don't like other things. If you're on the left, it's vice versa. And I kind of continuously find myself in the middle, and it's a weird spot to be. But I do believe in capitalism. I believe in lower taxes, but at the same time, let's be efficient with the taxes we're collecting. There's nothing less efficient than a government agency, and let's get this stuff done.
I've always described myself as fiscally conservative, but socially liberal, and
yes.
I'm liberal. I support the Democratic Party when I can. And or when I feel like it's right. And, a majority of Americans are somewhere in between these two diametric opposites now. I feel like they used to be closer. It could have been our childhood lens, but I feel like the divisiveness in this country has certainly, and the internet has allowed the radical sides to have a voice. And those of us in the middle, I know I will side more on the left. Oh, no, I always side on the left. I don't know what I'm saying.
I guess as we move into wrapping this up, I think I speak for both of us when I say we see you, we hear you, and we are compelled to make change happen. We don't know exactly what that looks like yet. We've gone through a couple of things today that could be a starting point. I know I personally have the wheels turning and want to try to do something to push this thing forward. But in any case, not from the sense of self-promotion, but just to open up the conversation. You can find us online on Twitter at namely90s. That's with the 90s, and myself, Andrew, at namely Andrew, and Brandon over there at B Schwitty.
Feel free to open a dialogue or continue the one that we started here. But you know how to find us, you know how to subscribe to us, and we'll return to our normal format next week.
Take care.